Hi, I'm Jeremy Cantrell, and I'm going to spend at least a few minutes every day kind of going through an issue, a big issue that I see in the news that I kind of want to think about and look into. And for me, this is kind of a good way to kind of put my thoughts into a way that I could kind of share with others. Vice President J.D. Vance met with Pope Francis on Easter Sunday, 2025, less than 24 hours before the Pope died. The Pope's last official visit with the top U.S. executive branch was very different from his first, nearly a decade earlier. The Vice President's meeting doesn't seem to have been planned in advance, since reports are that J.D. Vance was in Rome for a visit with the Italian Prime Minister, which took place on Friday. On Saturday, the Vice President met with the Vatican's number 2 official, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. The Vice President and the Holy See's Secretary of State met with their discussion focused especially regarding countries affected by war, political tensions, and difficult humanitarian situations, with particular attention to migrants, refugees, and prisoners. In other words, the discussion most likely touched on the hot topics of the day, which most likely included the war in Ukraine and the situation in the United States regarding immigration crackdowns. The next day, a meeting of merely just a few minutes was arranged between the Pope and the Vice President. There were no details of any discussion of worth or substance, except for Easter greetings, and the Pope basically providing a photo op where he gave Easter eggs to the Vance children. Regarding this meeting, there was an undercurrent of tension between Washington and the Vatican due to the Vatican's alarm over the administration's crackdown on migrants and cuts in international aid. Before President Trump even took office and was telegraphing his incoming administration's plans for widespread raids to round up immigrants across the United States, the Pope reacted to the news in an Italian television interview back in January, where he said implementing such plans would be a disgrace. The Pope previously let his views out regarding Donald Trump publicly before. In the lead up to the 2016 presidential election, Pope Francis had even remarked that he didn't view Trump as a Christian, in his view, or at least his view regarding building walls and going after migrants. The Pope's last visit with an American official contrasted sharply with his first visit with President Obama, way back in March 2014. Instead of a brief, perfunctory visit, Pope Francis spent nearly an hour with President Obama, often veering into matters of both geopolitical and U.S. political significance. While the details of the discussion haven't been fully disclosed, Obama's meeting with Vatican's number 2 before that visit indicates the same issues that were discussed with Vance in 2025 were roughly the same back in 2014. And those issues being Ukraine, migration, and immigration. Of course, the issues were different both in specifics and perspective between the 2014 talks and the 2025 talks. The Russian invasion of Crimea occurred just a few months prior to President Obama's and Pope Francis's first meeting, and it wasn't a full-on war at that point, at least not compared to what it had become by April 2025, by Vance's visit. In terms of migration, there were still massive amounts of migrants traveling via boats to Europe to escape the uncertainty and violence of civil wars, uprisings, and despotic crackdowns in northern Africa. In terms of immigration in the U.S., the President and the Pope saw eye to eye in terms of establishing better conditions for the safe and welcoming movement of people, and actually even talked about some of Obama's hopes to have immigration reform in America. Although Obama and the Pope got along well and seemed to have personal chemistry, in a later visit by the Pope to the U.S., for instance, Obama let him use Marine One to get around. He didn't do that just for anybody, though. A future president, however, was a little bit more liberal when it came to Marine One and Air Force One and, all the big toys of the president. The cordiality between President Obama and Pope Francis contrasted with some others. Despite the smiles and the cordiality between the two, there were some disagreements between Obama's administration and the Vatican. The big issue was regarding abortion. Cardinals in the U.S. had just recently come out against Obama's health care bill for its subsidizing contraception and its coverage over abortion. The position doesn't even seem to have been brought up, however, during Vance's visit, since the Trump administration took a very different stance on abortion. And likewise, the situation was also flipped regarding immigration. My analysis at this point, after looking at the two meetings, the first and last with American leaders, is this. Pope Francis was remarkably consistent in what he prioritized. He focused on peace and the humane treatment of migrants and immigrants. Those, after all, were the main points of both that first visit and that last visit. Did it make an impact? Only time will tell.